Shalom, and welcome to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. This is a recording of a Shabbat sermon by JTS Rabbinical student Claire Davidson Bruder.
When I tell people that I'm a Rabbinical student, the very first thing they always want to know is how observant I am and what that's like. And when people think about Jewish observance, they're liable to think about Shabbat and Kashrut, those two big categories of halakha, of Jewish law. Is it hard to stay off the internet for 24 hours every single week? How did I make it through college when I had one fewer day a week to do homework? And of course, the classic. Have you really never tried bacon? Not even once? Sometimes it seems to me like the Jewish community values Shabbat and Kashrut as the primary hallmarks of religious observance, more than any other mitzvot. Sometimes this emphasis seems particularly strong in the conservative movement. In fact, before I started rabbinical school, I signed an agreement with JTS, delineating certain halachic standards that rabbinical and cantorial students are expected to uphold. It probably won't surprise you to hear that observing Shabbat and keeping kosher were central to this agreement. Don't get me wrong. I value my observance of Shabbat and of Kashrut, but I'm also compelled by all the other ways in which those and other practices tie me to my communities and to God. But in a religion famously touting 613 mitzvot, 613 positive and negative commandments, why are Shabbat and Kashrut the two that are seen as the arbiter of who can call themselves an observant Jew? So I ask, are there alternative models for defining religious life in today's world? Or do we feel that Shabbat and Kashrut alone suffice in representing our communal values? Over the past 2 weeks, I couldn't help but notice that this section of Dvarim that we're reading puts a strong emphasis on mitzvot having to do with tzedakah, with giving money, with donation, with pursuing justice and equity in the world. In last week's parsha, Ki Teitzei, we learned about shichacha, or overlooking, as it pertains to our harvesting practices. So that parsha reads, Ki tiktzor ketzirecha basadeh, when you reap the harvest in your field, veshachachta omer basadeh, and you forget a sheaf of wheat. Lo tashuv, do not return. Do not turn back to get what you've overlooked. Instead, it shall go to the ger, the stranger, the yatom, and the almanah. It shall go to the fatherless, to the widow. At first glance, especially given the economic constraints of today's world, this practice might seem counterintuitive. Why shouldn't we amend the consequences of forgetfulness when given the chance? If you drop something valuable, such as sustenance, and you realize that, and you can go back, why shouldn't you pick it up? But the Torah suggests otherwise. Here, our forgetfulness is not a defect, but rather something that can serve to benefit others in our community. Through the mitzvah of shichacha, our errors and our forgetfulness allow us to take care of others. When we are fortunate to have such an abundance that we are capable of actually overlooking some of it, those resources are no longer ours. They are not for our sustenance, but for sustaining others. This week, in Parshat Ki Tavo, the method for giving moves from the realm of the forgotten to the realm of the purposeful. Earlier today we read, when you have set aside in full 1/10 of your yield, Beshana HaShlishit, in the third year, Shnat HaMaaser, the year of the tithe, you have given it to the family of the Levite, the stranger, the fatherless, and the widow, that they may eat their fill in your settlements. When you have done that, you shall declare before God, I have cleared out the consecrated portion from my house. I have given it to the family of the Levite, the stranger, the fatherless, and the widow, just as you commanded me. In these psukim, we are commanded to give away 1/10 of our yield every 3 years. These goods will go to help support the Levi'im, in addition to the stranger, fatherless, and widow. Supporting the Levi'im is important to the spiritual life of the people of Israel. It was the tribe of Levi'im who carried the Mishkan, the tabernacle, God's home on earth, through the desert to Eretz Yisrael. They also have the role of accompanying the Kohanim, the priests, with music and song in the temple. And because of this role, the Levi'im do not own land of their own, and thus they require support from the harvests of the other tribes of our people. But in addition to the Levi'im, we are commanded to donate part of our yield to the stranger, the fatherless, and the widow. Like the Levi'im, these people may not own land that they can harvest, and they may not be able to support themselves. Unlike the Levi'im, these groups of people do not necessarily serve a specific role in the community that is beneficial to the Am, to the entire people of Israel. This 10% tithe that the Torah commands us to give away is therefore not a form of compensation, but rather a gift with no expectations in return. Today, of course, we no longer have a temple, and we no longer have Levi'im who are tasked with supporting that temple. We do, of course, continue to have the second group of people in need of support, the stranger, the fatherless, and the widow. And as such, Jewish law throughout the ages have maintained that we are to use a percentage of our income toward tzedakah, toward the pursuit of equality in the world, toward the sustenance of others. In the Mishnah Torah, Maimonides' seminal halachic work, he writes, that which is the most desirable way of fulfilling the mitzvah of giving to the poor is to give 1/5 of one's financial resources, and 1/10 is average. But giving less than 10%, according to Maimonides, demonstrates miserliness. Other important halachic texts also support Maimonides' assertion that tzedakah is an obligation. The Shulchan Aruch says that if one does not give tzedakah, or does not give enough tzedakah, the courts should pressure him to do so. The courts should pressure him to do so. The Shulchan Aruch even goes so far as to say that if such pressure does not succeed, it is actually within the court's right to seize that man's property and to distribute tzedakah from it on his behalf. Make no mistake. Kitavo's commandment of giving is a commandment. The Torah does not teach us that giving tzedakah is a nice thing to do. It teaches that it is mandatory. It is required the same way other biblical commandments are. In addition to laws, this parsha also lists a number of curses, which we heard so beautifully read earlier. And one of these curses is, Arur mateh mishpat ger yatam ve'almanah. Cursed is the one who subverts the right of the stranger, the fatherless, and the widow. Cursed. So often, when we read Dvarim, curses and blessings don't feel so salient for our lives today as they might have in ancient Israel. Once a year, however, as the high holidays begin to creep up on us, even those of us who do not believe in an interventionist God start to worry about what Hashem might have in store for us this upcoming year. In just a few weeks, when we recite Unatana Tokef, we will read through a list, a scary list, of possible fates for each of us that might be inscribed in God's book of life. Afterwards, though, we will remind ourselves, Uteshuva, utefila, utzedakah, ma'avirin et roa hagzerah. Teshuva, tefillah, and tzedakah all have the power to avert the severity of what God has in store for us. I find that during this time of year, teshuva and tefillah tend to get the most airtime. We know this month that we have to forgive people, we have to vow to do better ourselves, and of course we have to spend hours and hours sitting in shul davening. But that list is not a hierarchy. Tzedakah is just as important as tefillah and teshuva in securing God's blessing. Our commitment, or lack thereof, to taking care of others in our community not only has an impact on our relationship with those around us, but also on our relationship with God. What would it look like if we as a community valued tzedakah not only as a kind deed or a nice thing to do, but as a requirement, even a prerequisite to considering ourselves observant? And I've learned that I'm actually not the only one thinking along these lines. Just last week, JTS shared with us Rabbinical and Cantorial students a new set of community norms that they are developing for future students, which are both expanded and expansive. These norms, which will bind all students, not only include tzedakah, but do so in the same sentence that includes Shabbat and kashrut. In this coming year, I'd like to call us all into a spirit of generosity, a recognition that it is good to take care of our communities. But I also want to take it one step further and call all of us to view tzedakah as a commandment, just like any other.
You've been listening to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. If you enjoy these podcasts, we invite you to write a review on the Apple Podcast site or wherever you get your podcasts. For more information about Temple Beth Am Los Angeles, go to tbala.org.